Good morning, and thank you for tuning in to the Global Current. I am Zanele Njaba.
And I'm Mallory Finch.
Today in news, the government of Myanmar carries out military strikes on the minority villages.
New Zealand copes with the damage from a major earthquake.
And Australia and the United States come to an agreement on the placement of refugees.
In analysis, the future of the U.S.-Syria relations under the upcoming Trump administration.
And the future of the Paris Climate Agreement.
Then, the Global Current, Zanele Njaba, brings us an interview with Dr. David Bossman on the 6th annual Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf Lecture.
And now, Adeline Patterson reports on Myanmar's military strikes against the minority Rohingya.
According to Human Rights Watch, high-resolution satellite images recorded on the mornings of October 22nd, November 3rd, and November 10th of this year reveal widespread destruction in the form of 430 burnt buildings throughout 3 villages in the northern Mongda version of Myanmar. The Mongda district lies in the Rakhine region of Myanmar, also known as Burma. The Rakhine region encompasses western Myanmar and borders Bangladesh. It is home to more than 1 million Rohingya Muslims. The wreckage of these villages in the Mongda district is the result of a series of events beginning on October 9th of 2016, when gunmen opened fire on 3 police outposts in the Mongda township and left 9 police officers dead. Then, between October 22nd and November 10th, the government of Myanmar has confirmed that Air Force helicopters opened fire on several armed Rohingya men after the killing of 2 Burma Army soldiers. According to a government statement, as many as 500 Rohingya men ambushed Burma Army troops conducting clearance operations in Mongta and Ratedong townships near the border with Bangladesh. According to Time magazine, the 500 men were armed with small guns, knives, and spears, and the government of Myanmar further asserts that they were Islamic militants. The Burma Army has since released statements claiming soldiers shot and killed at least 25 suspected assailants in the area on Sunday, November 13th. Currently, the government of Myanmar is not permitting independent journalists to enter Rakhine, and extensive information regarding the scale of conflict is unavailable. The Rohingya minority in Myanmar are not recognized as citizens, and according to BBC News, considered by many to be illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. They are considered a stateless minority and often victimized. Human Rights Watch is now calling for UN intervention in the conflict. This is Adeline Patterson reporting for the Global Current.
Up next, Joseph Arrigo brings us a report on the devastating earthquake that hit New Zealand.
On Monday, November 14, 2016, a series of earthquakes rocked the island of New Zealand, causing damages to infrastructure and loss of life across the country. The 7.8 magnitude tremor's epicenter was at a point between Kaikoura and Christchurch on the southern half of the island country. This seismic event, in turn, caused several aftershocks on the northern half of the island, according to a report with CNN. This earthquake has wrought damage throughout the country. In the New York Times interview with the Prime Minister of New Zealand, he discussed the details of the earthquake.
Firstly, dealing with the quake itself, the best advice we have is probably what you know. There was a 7.5 metre, 7.5 on the Richter scale, 15 metres deep, but it also went, we think, about 100 kilometres out to sea.
This catastrophic event also caused a tsunami roughly 2 meters high, followed by a series of dangerously large waves. The Hundali Fault caused the sea levels to rise and diminish the eastern coastline of the southern island. However, the earthquakes have not only damaged civil infrastructure, but also damaged the island's ecosystem. Wildlife experts feel concerned for the effect of the tsunami on native New Zealand animals. Many breeding grounds for seals, penguins, dolphins, and other New Zealand wildlife species are feared to have been destroyed in the mudslides created by the earthquakes. Destruction of these breeding grounds would devastate the populations of native species. Even more concerning are the possible effects of the tsunami on the endangered marine life. Currently, experts have not been able to assess these effects, The Guardian reports. Naval vessels from several countries around the globe, such as Australia, America, and Canada, are on their way to New Zealand to provide relief efforts to the devastated island and its people. Notably, this will be the first time in 30 years that a U.S. Navy ship has been to the island of New Zealand. Due to the fantastic coping response from the citizens of New Zealand, as well as the relief efforts, New Zealand officials have refused to place the country in a state of emergency, stating that its people are handling the crisis well. The Associated Press also reports that the evacuation of many cities are underway, despite the massive destruction of roads. According to Air Commodore Darren Webb, the acting commander of the Joint Task Force, 380 people were evacuated by naval efforts, and another 340 people were airlifted. Tourists on the island have either been provided airlifts by their native country's embassies or by personal charter. As of reports Tuesday, November 15th, the current death toll still stands at 2 people, with 57 others being treated for injuries. However, despite the large seismic activity, the loss of life and damage done in this earthquake pales in comparison to the New Zealand earthquakes of 2011, leaving 185 people dead in a 6.3 earthquake. This is Joseph Arico reporting for the Global Current.
Next this morning, Alexandra Prostamo reports on refugee resettlement deals between the United States and Australia.
On Sunday, the Australian government reached a resettlement deal for refugees held on Manus Island and Nauru. These refugees will soon be eligible for resettlement in the United States. According to The Guardian, the deal will apply to the refugees housed in offshore detention residency facilities and for the 370 refugees receiving medical care in Australia. The Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, said that the deal will prioritise families, women and children held both on the Manus Island and Nauru. Prime Minister Turnbull thanked the U.S. and its cooperation.
I want to thank the United States for their cooperation. We have a long history of cooperation in which our two nations pursue our mutual and respective humanitarian objectives.
In fact, the refugees will be taken by the U.S., who will cooperate with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Many argue that the recent presidential election could create difficulties for this deal. However, the agreement was reached a long time ago, and Prime Minister Turnbull is not concerned about the Trump presidency negatively affecting the deal. In addition, the deal is supported by the UN, which has stated that humanitarian operations worldwide have to focus on saving lives, providing human safety assistance, and enduring human rights for all, while protecting the vulnerable refugees around the world. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has welcomed the deal, but it has no formal role in processing it. Thus, the resettlement deal may strengthen the connections between the U.S. and Australia. For the Global Current, this is Alexandra Prostamo.
Next up, Ogili Onyinye analyzes the future of U.S.-Syrian relations.
Officially, Syria-United States relations are non-existent. Relations were formally severed in 2012 due to the violence of the Syrian civil war. The Obama administration initiated a policy of rapprochement with Syria in its turn to the Middle East. However, with Damascus' internationally questioned response to the so-called rebels, informal relations have cooled dramatically, and senior American officials, including President Obama himself, have repeatedly called for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to resign. President-elect Trump has said that the U.S. has bigger problems than Assad and that he would tell the military to knock the hell out of ISIS, which he could have done originally. Trump has made it clear that his main priority in Syria will not be initiating humanitarian intervention to save civilians, but rather the elimination of ISIS terrorists who might attack the United States. That most likely means jetsoning President Obama's combined policy of killing ISIS and pushing out Assad. Further, it implies a willingness to join hands with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Assad's main ally, and for whom Trump has expressed admiration. "I don't like Assad at all," Trump said in the presidential debate last month, but Assad is killing ISIS, Russia is killing ISIS, and Iran is killing ISIS. In an interview conducted on November 16, 2016 with the Portuguese news outlet RTP, President Assad noted that President-elect Trump's administration could lead to change, but this is not guaranteed.
Of course, I would say this is promising, but can he deliver? Can he go in that regard? What about the countervailing forces within the administration, the media, the mainstream media that were against him? How can he deal with it? That's why, for us, it's still dubious whether he can do or live up to his promises or not. That's why we are very cautious in judging him, especially as he wasn't in a political position before. So we cannot tell anything about what he's going to do. But if, let's say if he's going to fight the terrorists, of course we're going to be ally, natural ally in that regard, with the Russians, with the Iranians, with many other countries who wanted to defeat the terrorists.
President Assad also mentions that the U.S., regardless of domestic politics, has a militaristic agenda that appears in its foreign policy. Such an agenda has been present across multiple administrations, both Democrat and Republican. Assad exemplifies a rational caution toward the consequences of a Trump administration, stating, "We never bet," because what they say in their campaign is different from what they practice after they are elected. This statement in itself illustrates the duplicity of the Syrian president's approach to the American president-elect. While he's open to a positive shift in interactions between the two nations, he's not willing to make deep policy investments in the unconfirmed promises of an untested leader. In conclusion, even the Syrian president is uncertain about the relationship with the U.S. under Trump's incoming administration. Assad's expectations seem to be that the U.S. and Syria can resume friendly relations, but he states clearly that it is not about the regime or the president, but about the American institution, which would not change. Assad appears to be fairly optimistic considering the present circumstances, not only of his country's relations with the U.S., but also the violent state of his nation. However, looking at the transition cabinet and the candidates for the national security advisors of the Trump's administration, his positivity may be unfounded. This is Ogili Onyinye reporting for the Global Current.
And now, Daniel Kim analyzes the future of the Paris Climate Agreement.
The 21st century is an age of new opportunities, with breakthroughs such as the internet and Facebook that allow communication from one end of the world to the other within seconds. These innovations also allow consumers to go shopping without leaving their living rooms. Even now, scientists and innovators are discovering new ways to better human life. However, new challenges are presented as terrorism runs rampant throughout multiple continents, discussion on security and privacy in the cyberspace continues, and global climate change is altering weather patterns and yielding storms that are more potent than their predecessors. As the world enters a new phase of uncertainty that offers both hope and fear, countries must now unite and collaborate in order to secure a better future for coming generations. But current threats such as climate change have the potential to destroy the environment that future generations will one day inherit. Despite the hurdles that are presented today, many countries, including China, are taking more drastic steps in order to combat the main man-made disasters such as climate change. Recently, according to the European Commission, the Paris Agreement focused on key elements to address the adverse effects of climate change. This treaty includes keeping global temperature below 2 degrees Celsius or 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit, ensuring appropriate measures and steps are taken to mitigate the risk of increasing the global temperature using the current technological and scientific resources available, as well as coming quote-unquote together every 5 years to set more ambitious targets as required by science and so forth. These are lofty goals that 195 countries have agreed to by attaching signatures to this document. Currently, large Western countries like the United States and France still have major cities that are in the green zone. For example, Air Quality Index reports that London's air quality is 63, which is considered moderate. This appears to be a trend throughout major cities in the world. In the United States, AQI found that Los Angeles has the air quality of 74. In other major cities around the world, such as Delhi and Beijing, the number ranges from 124 to 207. Not only does each 195 countries have to find solutions to the air pollution, they also have to consider other factors such as alternative sources of energy, environmentally conscious waste management, and water pollution. Experts and researchers will receive more pressure from their governments to find these solutions quickly as possible. As the air quality level fluctuates throughout major cities around the world, one can see just one of many obstacles that must be overcome to meet the ambitious expectations. Now, with the election of a new American president, another impediment to progress in combating climate change may arise. With his rather boisterous claims that, quote, there is no evidence that humans are responsible for climate change, as stated in a speech by Reuters.
President Obama has done everything he can to get in the way of American energy for whatever reason. He's made life much more difficult for North Dakota as costly regulation, and I mean serious regulation, makes it harder and harder to turn a profit.
A strong proponent for drilling, fewer regulations, and approval of the Keystone XL oil pipeline from Canada, President-elect Trump's rhetoric strongly implies a desire for the United States to back out of the Paris Agreement. The rest of the world has responded in form of dissent aimed at the newly elected U.S. president, according to Climate Desk. However, the rest of the world cannot take more serious action as the Paris Agreement is non-binding, meaning countries can pull out of the treaty without repercussions. Right now, the two largest greenhouse gas emitters are China and the United States. If the United States backs down from this agreement, then China has a strong incentive to follow the American lead and exit as well. The next question is to ask is why President-elect Trump will present such defiant and adamant stance against climate change. First of all, one must look at the election period in the United States. During this period, he appealed to the lower-class white population whose incomes were tended to derive from companies that would have reasons to combat extensive climate change policies. He promised to create jobs that would benefit many American workers, making specific notes of sectors such as mining, assembly line-based industries, and other industries that are aligned with U.S. economic interests. According to a recent pay scale, an average salary for mining engineering is $82,000, while a factory worker makes $28,580 per year. If Trump counters his campaign promises and aligns himself with those who prefer investing in new sources of alternative, renewable energy and favor the Paris Agreement, he commits political suicide as a large section of his political base will feel betrayed. As the first ever president who never held public office or served in the military, the entire world is watching as the United States navigates through uncharted territory. This intense focus is especially true for the current fight against climate change. This is Daniel Kim reporting for the Global Current.
Finally this morning, Zanele Ninjapa brings us an interview with Dr. David Bossman on the 6th annual Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf Lecture.
Good morning, Global Current listeners. This is Zanele Njapa, and today I'll be conversing with panel facilitator of the 6th annual Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf Lecture, hosted by the Sister Rose Thering Fund for Education in Jewish Christian Studies, titled Can We All Get Along? The Step Beyond Dialogue. In a time where the world is culturally anxious and seemingly or arguably culturally or religiously hostile, our guest today, this morning, is the founding executive director of the Sister Rose Thering Fund for Education in Jewish Christian Studies and editor-in-chief of Biblical Theology Bulletin since 1981. His publications use cross-cultural studies in global religions and other facets, focusing on shared values and their applications in present-day contexts. Okay. Dr. Bossman, Dr. David Bossman, welcome to the Global Current, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, let's get straight into it. First, just to set a context for our listeners, do you mind just giving us a brief background or just telling us a little bit about the annual tradition of the Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf Lectures, as well as the Sister Rose Thering Fund?
The Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf Lectures are funded by Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf, who was a board member of the Sister Rose Thering Fund. She was a friend of Sister Rose. In fact, she said that Sister Rose was like her second mother. Mm-hmm. So she's been very interested in promoting the values that we have in the Sister Rose Thering Fund. Marcia said that she felt one of the things that we really need mm-hmm. for a great impact in the community is a lecture series that would be very interesting to the wider community, not just an academic lecture. So it would be bringing people in from the broader community. And she liked the idea of having a panel rather than simply having a single lecturer, so that different points of view, and also would stimulate audience participation. Yes. So we've been doing that for a number of years, and I got a very favorable response from Marcia mm-hmm. about this one that we had on Can We All Get Along?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So this was definitely a very good one. And going straight into it, had the sub-theme, or I'm not sure if it was a sub-theme, but it was engaging neighbors, sharing values, and building a better world. Do you mind just giving us a little bit of a hint what this is all about?
Right. Well, we had two subtitles. One was that, mm-hmm. And the other one was a step beyond dialogue. And the idea is the step beyond dialogue is stop talking and start doing things. Wow. And so what we're going to do is engage neighbors, mm-hmm. get to meet people in your world, outside your comfort zone, I suppose you could say, and understand that we really do share values as human beings, as living in the same society, socialized in common values, and understand how our values are social, and they're personal, and they're religious, even though we have different religions. And then moving on to the question of building a better world, and that's really the step beyond dialogue, where we're actually working together to build a better world.
Okay, thank you. And then, what role can diplomacy, or rather negotiation, even play in getting in the sphere of getting along?
Right. Now, the speaker that we had, Joseph Montville, worked in the State Department for many years, and he was an expert on the Middle East. But he traveled around the world and was in different areas for the State Department.
Yes.
He, about 1981 or so, he came up with the terminology of track 1 and track 2 diplomacy. Track 1 diplomacy is between governments, and so you have the State Department is working with other governments, etc. Yes. Track 2 is more personal. It's on the individual basis, or networking, getting to know people on the ground. And that's what we are doing with getting along. It's track 2 diplomacy, learning how to share values, learning how to make forward movements together without necessarily having the formal apparatus of international diplomacy.
Yes. I find that so interesting, because a lot of the time in the international realm, the individual sort of disappears, and we find that it's almost implied that there's no power in the individual,
right?
In terms of
let them do it.
So I absolutely agree with that. And another topic that's now becoming very popular, as you know, is immigration. With the UN summit that recently happened not so long ago, on just looking at how the world can move forward with globalization and people moving around. And now the question that I have is, what role would you say the concept of getting along and breaking down cultural and religious barriers can play in the scheme of globalization today?
Well, globalization, I hear, of course, it has many dimensions, but I think of globalization in terms of what Hillary Clinton wrote, is it takes a village. That we don't simply have our own ethnic groups or our own in-groups that we're working with in the real world. We have the bigger society. We live in a pluralistic society. Everybody comes from somewhere.
Yes.
And immigration is a fact of life. We are a nation of immigrants. But it's not only the United States, which is a nation of immigrants. All societies have high levels of immigration. Yes. And for us to say, well, we're so much different from everybody else, is simply not to realize that people move around. And migrations have taken place, and many of the people that we associate with one place generally came from somewhere else. So migration is a fact. Now, there was one rather interesting photograph today that I saw. Michelle Obama was holding up a sign, "I am being replaced by an immigrant."
Big Melania Trump, right? Okay.
Exactly. So the thing is, we've got to get used to the idea that this is normal. Immigration is normal. We simply have to know how to deal with it effectively, which means that we don't resist it. We don't turn people down. We don't discriminate against people. We see them in a positive light. They're adding something to our society, and they're teaching us, and we interact with them in a very constructive way.
Yes. And what are the different ways you would say? Because I really do like that idea of looking at it in a positive light, in a sense that diversity is really quite a strength. And what are the different ways that you think immigration and the moving around of people can actually add to the value of maybe education or whatever it is in a country?
Well, I'll tell you, Tom Friedman wrote for the New York Times in about 2008 when we were talking about the burst of the real estate bubble in the United States. And he said we would have no problem at all if we would simply open our doors to more immigrants from societies that are very highly energized, from India, from China, from many other countries where people are socialized to be very responsible, who are in fact very talented, would bring a lot. And he said, if we would simply open our doors to these immigrants rather than being xenophobic and blaming them for displacing us, we would in fact resolve our economic problems. But I think that that's basically what immigration does. It lubricates the job market. It keeps people vital. It doesn't necessarily displace people. It really creates new needs, new opportunities. And I think that that's really why the United States, for instance, as a quintessentially immigrant country, has prospered, because we have had these waves of immigration which bring new stimuli to our economy.
Yes, and it's definitely the way that we need to start looking at it. And in a world where diversity and uniqueness are prioritized and everyone is just looking at how we're different, and even the way that we're looking at differences is a positive one, but it's really taking our focus off of our similarities nowadays. And so what would you say is one of the ways that we can, or more than one of the different ways that we can begin to actually shed light on what's similar between us?
Well, just in the question about the role of women in society, the role of women was stereotyped, say that women belong in the home and blah, blah, blah. Well, now we're realistically doing more studies. We have an article in the November issue of Biblical Theology Bulletin about women in MENA societies, Middle Eastern, North African societies, where patriarchy is the norm. And the assumption is that men are in charge and men make the decisions. But in fact, this article is pointing out, by John Pilch, that women are very functional. Women really manage operations and are very much involved in decisions and in implementations. So it's kind of a fiction that men are in charge. So I think if we simply reflect on that in a conscious way, and we say that of course women integrate into the whole process of society. They're not just cooks in the kitchen, but they are managers of the household. They are partners in child rearing, and they're active within the larger social sphere. So that today, I always think of it in terms of in academia, when we have a committee, we set up a committee for something. And we always look around the table and say, do we have diversity? Not because we want to be politically correct, as they put it, but because we have a stronger committee. If we have diversity, we have more points of view. And so we're really looking for the integration of the wider society into our normal functions. And we're not inventing something new, we're simply recognizing what's already there.
Yes, and it gives everyone a chance to be able to contribute positively to building something that's a lot stronger as a result.
It doesn't have to be behind the scenes.
Yes.
It's out front, because it's being done anyway. So put it out front and recognize the equality of people, even though each person brings oftentimes a unique point of view and a unique contribution, but we're all focusing on the same tasks.
Yes. And then going back to an area that's more close to your heart and more in your focus with culture and religion. And would you say that culture and religion nowadays, we're really turning into a world where culture and religion are something that's thrown aside? Do you still think that there's a place for culture and religion to play in getting us all to get along?
Absolutely. We all live in a culture or in cultures. I mean, culture is simply civilization or a purity system, or how do people do things. A purity system is who does what, when, where, and how. That's a purity system, and that's what makes a culture operate. There's just an understanding of people who are socialized into a culture. This is how we do things. But I think that the limitations on that is the sense that there is only one way to do things. Who does what, when, where, and how. There's a right way and there's a wrong way.
Yes.
Whereas today, we're confronting the everyday experience. We recognize that there are different ways of doing things, just as there are different ways of cooking a meal.
Yes.
And there are different ways of doing things, different ways of prioritizing things, and different approaches to life and to the questions of religion. I think that one of the big surprises in religion is how much of our religious observance is really cultural, that it's not inherent in the religion to do it one way or another, but it's simply how that religion is lived in different cultures. So that there are Catholics who live in all range of cultures, there are Jews who live in all range of cultures, there are Muslims who live in all range of cultures, so that when people understand their religion as embedded in a culture, they realize that there's more flexibility, because if you take that same religion and put it in a different culture, we can do it differently. Yes. And so in that way, I think whatever incentive we have to be religious, to build community, to build a moral system, a sense of ethics and purpose, and subordination to a higher power, that can be done in many different ways. And that was one of the great insights of the last document of Second Vatican Council called Nostra Aetate, and which means in our age. And it's a sea change in Catholic teaching. It begins by saying, in our age, we realize that there are many people in the world. We've discovered the rest of the world. There are many people in the world who are asking the same questions that we're asking about the ultimate meaning of life, and how we proceed in an ethical, etc. way, and how that is expressed symbolically in our religious traditions. And so we have to begin respecting the questions that other people have, and also the answers that they have. Yes. That those answers, they come from long traditions. A lot of social development takes place in them, and we can learn from each other. And so we're not weakening our own religion, we're strengthening it by understanding that other people are asking the same questions that we are.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really beautiful. Dr. David Bossman, thank you so much for joining us today and giving our listeners some food for thought.
Thank you for coming in. It was just delightful, and I'm very happy that you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm concluding that it's possible and advisable for each of us to make an effort to get along and to look beyond our differences for that which is shared. I'm Zanele Njapa for The Global Current, saying thank you and God bless. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Global Current. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I'm Zanele Njapa.
And I'm Mallory Finch.
Same time,
same place,
next week.
The Global Current is brought to you by the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University. Our executive producer is Liam Scollins. Our associate producer is Morgan Mount. Our news editor is John Trudeau. Our analysis editor is Marcia Hutton. Our technical producer is Trevor West. And our interview segment is produced by Emily Lividay. The Global Current theme song is Acid Jazz by Kevin MacLeod. You've been listening to The Global Current on WSOU 89.5 FM, Seton Hall's Pirate Radio.